While what is now referred to as the Metroidvania genre has been around for many years, its popularity and the solidification of the style into a named genre is a more recent phenomenon. That said, you can't possibly keep up with all of these crazy indie releases in this genre, so I'm here to help with 10 Metroidvania games that perhaps didn't get the recognition they deserve, but belong in your collection. As always, we thank you so much for supporting independent content. Be sure to head over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames if you love indies and AA niche titles as much as we do. You'll gain Discord access, shoutouts at the end of every single video, early ad-free shows, and even free games depending on your tier. Your community awaits you. Otherwise, be sure to like and subscribe for more great indie content, and let's get into the list. First, we have Itorah, which is a mix of modern Metroidvania and old-school games like Simon's Quest and The Adventure of Link, where players navigate an overworld area to get to a variety of different dungeons. The vividly colored Mesoamerican-inspired fantasy world explored in the game is something words can't really do justice. This is one Metroidvania that you really need to experience for yourself. Itorah released in 2022 and features a story involving the last remaining human. She searches to discover what happened to her species and begins to find links to how that fate may be linked to a deadly plague of supernatural origin that now threatens the demi-humans who remain in the world. Just like many other Metroidvania games, you'll have ability upgrades that can help both in combat and to bypass ability gates that are scattered across the map. But the layout of the game is also similar to other titles like Infernax and Simon's Quest, where the overworld and town areas are between the dungeons. This one does get really tough late game, so be aware of that, but players who have learned to use all of their abilities should be able to handle it without much trouble. Itorah is available on consoles as well, PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, PC, good old games, so you can play it pretty much anywhere, and it's well worth your time. Constantly on sale too. Let us know in the comments below, did you ever play this great Metroidvania that got a little bit overlooked? Moving right along, we have 3000th Duel, which released in 2019, and it takes a more Souls-influenced approach to the Metroidvania genre, but with a lot faster gameplay. Because of this mix of elements, I would consider 3000th Duel to be closer to games like Hollow Knight and Ender Lilies, but I wouldn't call it a flat-out Souls-like experience. If you are looking for something a little closer to Blasphemous or Death's Gambit Afterlife, you might look elsewhere. This one might not speak to you as much. That said, if you are interested in some of the mechanics of Souls games but would like something more accessible, then 3000th Duel would be an excellent choice. While you must still use caution and learn enemy patterns, there's also a bit of a hack and slash element to the game, and the combat is really fast. There's decent challenge to be had for those looking for it, but it's definitely more forgiving than a lot of other games within these genres. 3000th Duel is available digitally on Steam, and it's also available on the Nintendo Switch. Next up, we do have a review for this game right here at I Dream of Indie Games, and for those of you who enjoyed 3000th Duel, you'll find a lot to like in this next one, HunterX. You also might notice some similarities between those two games. This is because many of the same developers worked on both of these titles. HunterX makes the combat considerably more technical while retaining a fast feel. There is somewhat of a hack and slash element to it, and there's also an increased emphasis on defensive actions as well as combos. If you like your Metroidvanias very combat intensive, then HunterX might be right up your alley. The game is available digitally on both Steam and the Nintendo Switch. Let's head over to Dex. Now, Dex is a game that can just as easily be called an RPG as much as it can be called a Metroidvania. There's an emphasis on exploration in a cyberpunk world, but it also features a fair amount of action. The game has a surprising amount of dialogue and even missions that take place in cyberspace, which will appeal to fans of games like Shadowrun. This one's available digitally on Steam and both digitally and physically on the Switch. Obtaining a physical copy can be pretty pricey now, unfortunately. I had to track down the Australian release to find one that's more affordable. Still, this one is worth the price of admission, especially with those RPG elements that help it to stand out quite a bit from the crowd. Oh, and you know what? I almost forgot. This is also available on PlayStation consoles and Xbox, so you can play this one pretty much anywhere as well. Let's now get into The Vagrant, or perhaps you know it as Sword of the Vagrant. Here's another one that could easily qualify as a 2D action RPG, and that's going to be a theme with many of these other games on the list. The Vagrant released in 2018, and it's both a tribute to Vanillaware action RPGs like Odin Sphere or Muramasa the Demon Blade, but has an identity all of its own with some strong Metroidvania elements. It's an interesting aesthetic that mixes elements of anime and 80s dark fantasy fantasy movies. This is a game where New Game Plus can also change the outcome because you can be strong enough to win some of the battles you're supposed to lose, so I definitely recommend playing it again after beating it. While I won't spoil any of the surprises, I'll just say to save before fighting those battles in New Game Plus. You'll thank me later. The Vagrant didn't get much attention when it released on Steam. It has developed a small cult following since, with the release on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and then Switch. The combat is really good, and the game's quite customizable as well. They are planning a PS5 port in the future, I hear, and while most retailers who carried the physical version have since run out, you can still get the Switch release directly from Red Art Games by ordering from their website. Alright folks, if you love the Wonder Boy or the Monster World series, then you will find plenty to appreciate in Aggelos. While the game draws heavily from its inspirations, it also adds modern Metroidvania gameplay and creates a good mix that combines the best of old and new. Aggelos also reminds me a bit of the ActRaiser games with its themes, as the protagonist is an angel sent by God to help people whose world has been overrun by monsters, and they need to find the source of this influx. Aggelos is very easy to pick up and play, with a nicely paced progressive difficulty curve that will give players time to build up their skills before facing the tougher challenges of the late game. I will give you a heads up that the challenges later on not only involve combat, but also a lot of platforming, so do keep that in mind if you have an aversion to platforming games. Aggelos is available digitally on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, and the Switch. It's also available physically on Switch. On to number 4, which is Valdis Story, Abyssal City. Valdis Story is an example of how a game can become overlooked just because it was released before its genre exploded into popularity. This came out all the way back in 2013. It's one of the earlier Metroidvanias of the modern indie scene, but also one that deserves to be considered one of the classics. There's an emphasis on RPG elements with a lot of dialogue and NPC interactions, so that's a little bit different from more recent Metroidvanias. There's 4 different protagonists that can be controlled separately, and character building through an experience system and looting equipment from enemy drops are also present. While its simple visual presentation might look a little bit dated compared to more recent classics in the genre like Hollow Knight or the Blasphemous games, it's still adequate and just kinda looks like an older generation game. If you like a Metroidvania with tons of RPG elements, challenging boss fights, then Valdis Story is a must-play. Valdis Story Abyssal City is available digitally on Steam and Good Old Games. Next up, getting to the bottom 3, we have Lost Epic, a release from 2022. It was one I was really excited about, but I was surprised it got very little coverage when it did finally release. It seems to be really misunderstood by those who are aware of its existence, and one of the reasons is that it's frequently referred to as a Souls-like, or even described as an anime version of Salt and Sanctuary. While the character building aspect does have similarities to that game, and there is some Souls influence in the combat, Lost Epic plays much more like HunterX, I'd say, than Salt and Sanctuary. The combat system is fast-paced, combo-based, and one of the more fun systems I've encountered in a Metroidvania. While some of the enemies do have patterns that are similar to those in Souls games, your character's fast movements and attacks will make them much easier to fight. There are also multiple difficulty options in Lost Epic, so you can make it pretty easy, somewhat challenging, or very difficult depending on your preference. There's a New Game Plus feature here as well, and extensive post-game areas, so it's pretty replayable. Lost Epic is available digitally on Steam, PS4, PS5, and the Switch. Number 2, it's After Death, a title that was released in 2017 and has sadly been another Steam release that's just not gotten all that much coverage. Many gamers may have overlooked this one because the backgrounds in the title look a little bit rough around the edges. Yes, the backgrounds are a bit blah, but the game does make up for it a bit with some interesting character design, especially the bosses, and it's really fun in terms of gameplay. You also get some awesome character abilities. You'll play as a badass skeleton who struts around to a wonderful synth soundtrack while traveling through the underworld in an attempt to find a way to escape it. Some of the abilities you can gain are things like turning into a skeletal spider to travel through narrow passageways, and even being able to freeze large bodies of water to walk across them. The boss fights are really the best part here. They're engaging with a huge emphasis on risk and reward, and some of them are really challenging. While the term hidden gem gets used very often these days, After Death may be one of the best examples of something fitting of that term. If you can look past some of the rough parts of the exterior, there's a true gem to be found. After Death is available digitally on Steam. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thanks for sticking with us. We hope you found an awesome Metroidvania to add to your collection. Here we are with number 1. It's Vigil, The Longest Night. This is an excellent game that isn't all that well known, in part due to one of the biggest downsides of modern gaming. It's a game that only released digitally, and it's been delisted. While it did get a small amount of attention from Souls-like diehards when it was available, it sadly still doesn't get any praise. This is one of my favorite Souls-like Metroidvanias, and deserves to be mentioned among the classics of the genre. Not only are there plenty of engaging combat encounters and a lot of exploration, but Vigil also really excels in atmosphere. There really is an undertone of dread both in the story and the environments, and there's some really interesting tonal shifts when entering new areas that provide a hint of what to expect. If you were in some dreary cavern with a brooding song and then suddenly enter an area with more energetic Castlevania-like playing tunes, then you know it's time to get ready for a fight. Vigil also has some excellent and grotesque boss designs. A lot of them have stuck in my memory ever since I played the game. A physical Switch release of Vigil was announced in 2021 by Super Rare Games, but nothing became of it, and perhaps it was the same legal reason that led to the delisting in the first place. Hopefully this situation will eventually change and the game will become available again, otherwise this will become a case of a classic game that will essentially be lost to most people. Have you played any of these games, folks? Let us know in the comments below. What are some of your favorite Metroidvanias that you think deserve more attention? We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for supporting independent content, and be sure to head over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames to gain Discord access, early ad-free shows, shoutouts every video, and so much more. We're waiting to meet you, excited to do so. Like and subscribe if you enjoy our content as well, and I will see you on the channel for more great indie gaming goodness.